The following is a local resident producers program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Access Television, the City of Oshkosh, the Oshkosh Cable Television Advisory Commission, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi. Wow. We're off to a really auspicious beginning here. Hi again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Eye on Oshkosh. I'm Cheryl Hentz. When I get my tongue out of my mouth here, Melanie Bloechl, former Oshkosh City Councilwoman and Mayor. She is our co-host, and joining us this evening, Tony Palmeri, who is the host of Commentary, another cable access show here in the Valley area. He's also the chair of the Department of Communications at UW Oshkosh. And our other guest this evening is Dr. Jim Simmons. He's the chair of the Political Science Department, also at UW Oshkosh. Welcome to you both.
We're surrounded by intellectuals. Protect yourself at all costs.
Surrounded by intellectuals, and I can't seem to talk right all of a sudden. Thanks very much for being here. We appreciate your joining us this evening. Lots of heated issues lately in the city of Oshkosh politics. No pun intended when I use the word heat, because as we're taping this on August 21st, it's got to be one of the hottest days of the year, I think. But right up out of the chute here, the South Shore Redevelopment District. At its August 12th meeting, the Oshkosh Common Council established the boundaries for the district, and they also approved a project.
Well, they did table it. They tabled it for 2 weeks.
Oh, they did?
Yeah.
I thought that they were going to go ahead and approve it.
They went and tabled it. Mr. Harris said they needed 2 more weeks.
Right. Well,
because
I missed that.
Because I had spoke and said that they should delay it at least until the middle of September, so that they claim they care about the university community, and no one on the university knew anything about this. I mean, had you followed this? No, and that's, I mean,
we're all going.
I assume maybe the chancellor knew something, but they claim they care about the students. 10,000. Not one student has any idea what's going on. And so Harris said that they should wait for 2 weeks, because I think Paul had made a comment about financial implications.
And how they were going to pay for all of
So
this.
they're planning to approve it at the August 25th meeting,
Okay.
even though probably 0.00001% of the population has any idea what this is all about.
Including the majority of us at this table.
Right.
So by the time this show airs, it will probably have passed.
Probably.
Because we're taping this on a Thursday. The council meeting is in like 4 days, 5 days. So, but you did talk, and this involves about 47 acres of land. And I'm going to hold up a map here, and if our cameraman could just kind of zoom in for us here. This is the area, and Joseph, I don't know how tight you can get this, but this is the area that we're talking about. This area all along the river here.
Just to give people an idea of the geography, it used to be where the old Morgan doors,
Yes.
and obviously with 47 acres of property, a far extended Morgan doors, but that's the general location of where the heart of the boundaries are going to be.
Right. Now, Tony, you were real, okay, thank you. You were real outspoken about this at the council meeting, and you did want it delayed for a couple of weeks. You had mentioned the students. I mean,
Not just the students. I mean,
right, but I mean, just now you had mentioned the students. How do you feel it will impact them?
Well, we're not really sure, because none of us really know what's being proposed for this redevelopment area. I said to the council, I don't think there's an option to do nothing in that area. Something has got to be done at some point. But remember, they keep bragging about the LDR and the consultants. Well, the consultants said the best way to do redevelopment is to get the whole community involved.
That is true.
Right.
I mean, in February they created a redevelopment authority. No one knows who's on the authority. Do you know?
No.
No, and actually, I don't know, I can't speak for the rest of the council people, but I know that Paul Esslinger has told you he doesn't know.
No.
Right.
And yet they create this group of
Right.
people.
Now, Jim can talk about the statutes, I'm sure. The statutes, I think, are clear that with a redevelopment authority, whatever you do develop has to be in the public interest. So would more apartment buildings constitute the public
Public
interest?
interest is like the Holy Ghost.
Right.
Oh, I
What
was
is
just
it?
going to say, well, would a public interest
Right.
constitute a singular developer?
Right, exactly.
Well, I suspect, although whatever LDR said, when they talk about the public, that's often narrowly defined. And it's often defined as those people who can afford to put out the money to develop in that way. And with your experience on the city council, you've known in the past that most of these discussions are behind closed doors,
Yes.
and oftentimes you're not even allowed to talk about what you've heard if you were involved in the discussion.
Exactly.
So I suspect that even before there were negotiations with members of the council, that the city planner and those working for the city met with major developers who are most likely to.
Honestly, Jim and Tony, I think what was going on is even before the buildings came down, there were discussions about what the potential would be for this property and how much, how fast can we get these buildings down so that we can, move this development along. And then they came to see that it's not just these corners that we could do, we can do the whole corridor. And I guess my concern with some of this, and you guys tell me what you think, they've done this downtown redevelopment, pro or against, and honestly, the way that they have approached this whole thing, I'm dead set against it, and I never will support it until they find a better, different way to do this. That whole idea of there, and all that kind of mumbo-jumbo crap doesn't make us feel better about spending money we don't have. The other thing is that they're biting off so many chunks at one time,
Right.
and it's all about how fast. Nobody wants to slow down and think, okay, is this the best use for this time? Are we moving in a solid, well thought out, progressive manner that will sustain time? It seems to me like everybody just wants their name on something to say that they've had downtown redevelopment, they've been supporters of this, rather than what will sustain time? How will this make good sense in 10 and 15 and even 20 years from now? Can you continue to build apartments and condos when you know what the market is now for people are buying their own homes because the interest rates are so incredibly low. The people who already own apartments are sitting with vacancies. They can't fill them.
Big time vacancies. I just did an article for a magazine that I write for, and one of the women that I interviewed, it's Michelle Litchens, who I know both
Sure.
you guys know. She is not only a landlord here in town, but she's a member of the Winnebago Apartment Association, a past board member for them, and she's also on the board for the state, the Wisconsin Apartment Association. She said that there's about a 20% vacancy rate in the city right now. Now that's pretty high. That's real high, and yet these people keep building. And
what big of a risk is there when all of your finances are being supported and backed by the city of Oshkosh?
Sure.
I mean, there's no risk here. You lose nothing. You're guaranteed your money. The city has backed you from beginning to end. If you fall flat on your keister because you made a stupid decision, guess who gets hurt? Not you, not the developer. City of Oshkosh will be left holding the bag and will knock down more buildings in another 20 years because it's an
Right.
eyesore.
well, we've got enough buildings to knock down.
There's another part of it too, and it's not just money, because some of these sites are either actual or suspected brownfields. So there's a contamination issue, which,
Right.
because of the brownfields legislation, the city takes on, but the developer doesn't. In fact, for the developer, it's only if the contamination moves off the property and affects
Right.
surrounding property owners. But if you've got an entire development district, actually you should have projected this was going to happen. The Northwestern has done a number of stories on riverfront redevelopment, and Jackson Kinney has been fairly open about what he intended to do. Not when it would happen, but the idea that you would move all the old industry off the river and hopefully move it into industrial parks And the plans, even before LDR, that Jackson and others working for the city had about how this was going to go has already been outlined. I've seen stories about it as long as 6-8 years ago. If you were looking at the north side of the river, you'd know that the university hired architects to develop the notion of this what the new urbanism, this kind of utopian living, learning community that. And
See, you have them on your campus too.
well, believe it or not, the governance works very similarly at the university, where you get the materials on the Friday or the Monday before the Tuesday meeting, and oftentimes these are just preliminary, but committees have already worked on them and they're very unhappy.
But this thing called the new urbanism is okay. The problem is that's not what we're doing in Oshkosh.
No.
I mean, new urbanism is based on your development centers on what really is best for a community to get people back living in a downtown area. Right. Development here is what's best for developers.
Mm-hmm. No,
right?
Yeah. No, this is the
problem.
city as growth machine, where you get a critical mass of people within government, usually those who work for major corporations, university, and major organizations, private developers. And basically, it's a growth machine. There's not high rises and overly optimistic projections about what can be accomplished if government is simply willing to take the risk and subsidize the projects.
What I don't understand is if these projects are so darn terrific, how come no one, all these really smart developers who made oodles of money before they started dealing with the city, how come they're not willing to stick their own neck out? I mean, it's not always just in brownfield areas. Mm-hmm. I mean, if these are some really good ideas, should it matter where you put them? Now, brownfields being the exception because of contamination and so forth, okay? But if this is redevelopment at its finest, let's take the 100 block. Right. If this is a good plan, wouldn't it have been a good plan with or without the city?
You'd think.
So my thought is either we're really stupid as a city, or these developers are a whole lot smarter of squeezing the money out of the taxpayers and making it look like they just did us a huge favor.
Right.
They just did us a favor.
It's not just a problem in Oshkosh. There's the mayor of Madison calls this the booster mentality, that city councils, mayors, city managers feel that they've got to sweeten the pot for developers. Even though any developer worth his or her salt will do a project anyway.
And we had that opportunity on the 100 block. We really did.
We did, and we did everything we could to frustrate and discourage it. So somehow this booster mentality has to be changed, because this tax incremental financing, which very few people actually understand. Yeah. I mean, this has become like a sweetheart deal arrangement for developers. What do we have, 19 TIF districts?
Well,
and more ticking all the time.
They often talk about planning, but the fact is that there's whatever plans they develop, they're willing to change if there's a developer who's willing to come in and propose something else. So
it's very reactionary, Jim. You're absolutely right.
It's almost like zoning. I mean, there's so many exceptions to zoning. The only reason why cities seem to have it is the money they can make by making exceptions.
Well, because then you can give different permits and charge a little bit extra. Yeah. Well, it's a prime example is right over in the university area where they did the strip mall with the bagel shop and the tumbleweeds, and guess what? They didn't have enough parking, so we'll knock down a few more houses and we'll pave that too. It sounds like the Joni Mitchell song. Put up a parking lot.
Yeah, I don't think that was unplanned. I'm sure that for those who would have opposed it, they were told that this wasn't going to happen.
Sure.
But in the back of everyone's mind, including those at the university, the idea was that many of those homes and much of what was there were eyesores anyway. So if you say some things, you avoid opposition down the road, because after all, the project has moved so far, and at that point, you can't go back.
Well, and that's the divide and conquer mentality. We'll do just this much. Okay, now everybody's going to get used to looking at this and seeing this, and the traffic will be generated, and enough people will have complained that there's not enough parking spots, and the onus is off of us. People are asking us to do this. Well, you knew the whole time you were going to do it. Why are you lying? I mean, what moron would say, hey, we only need 6 parking slots, but with all the new development, you need 250. You go out to a greenfield spot and you need 250 slots to park out at Target, don't you? I mean, But you go downtown, you only need 6 for tumbleweeds. You know, I mean, I don't know if they think we just fell off the local turnip truck or, you know, I think people are just frustrated. They stopped asking questions because they don't think they're getting straight answers anyway.
Well, I wrote a little essay for the Valley Scene, little plug here, recently called The Iron Triangle. And in that, I tried to show that the problem is you've got government, big business, i.e. big developers, and media that are really in partnership on these issues. And for the average individual to go against just government without having the support of media to educate, that's tough enough.
Yeah.
But then you've got the developers in there, all kind of like, I hate to use the phrase in cahoots, but that's what it is.
Welcome
And,
to, yeah.
and how does, now here we are, we're 4 people, we follow the news fairly close, and we don't have a clear idea of what's going on in the South Shore redevelopment. What does the average person on the street say about these things?
Zip. I mean, they don't have a clue what's going on. Absolutely
I mean,
not.
I've talked to so many people in Oshkosh in the last couple of months who say to me, what the hell is that on that 100 block? Where did that come from? And I'm like, well, didn't you know what was being planned there? Well, I kind of saw a few things about it, but...
You mean the big concrete thing didn't
no,
get you?
right. No one ever thought it would be that.
Yeah, or it would look like
Right,
that.
or that it would look like that.
Yeah.
I mean, does it look like it fits in a historic downtown area?
Well, and you know, if you'd seen what the other plans were, if you'd seen what the other plans were, and then you saw this monstrosity, it was like, it's pretty clear cut what we should be doing if we're really looking for an impact. How can I say this? An impact that wasn't an impact. I mean, it wasn't so overwhelming that it overshadowed. I mean, tell me something. You have a building the size of the one that's in the 100 block, and you're paying, what is it, like $1,000 for rent, for residential. And you're one of the lucky ones who actually gets to rent it, because I'm sure everyone's clamoring to look at the convention center. Or you get to look at the bank across the street. Hi, Bob. How's accounting going today? I mean, I don't understand what everybody's, it's going to be the greatest thing since
The other
sliced
thing that
bread,"
gets me, it's kind of, and I hate to be so negative, but it's
Oh,
like,
trust me, you're in
I
good
know,
company.
you see, you bring it out here, you know.
Yeah.
It's like a tale of 2 cities. I mean, from a certain angle, you see Court Tower there,
Yeah.
where we've had broken pipes, you know,
Windows. Yep.
people living in misery, and now it's
Getting
like, what is it,
burned.
like 200 yards away from this luxury apartment complex. It's like a tale of 2 cities.
It's a bit of an exaggeration. I mean, you're talking about the price that they want for those apartments, and I've heard they're making discounts just to have some
Just to get
occupancy.
people in?
Yeah, just to have some occupancy.
Well, they would
But
almost
if you look
have to.
inside, they're really not luxury.
Have you been
They're
in?
not.
And they're not what
did
you
you-
would expect.
Did you go on the tour?
I
talked
wasn't
to-
even invited. I don't know
Well,
why.
they didn't
It was
have
an open house. Anybody could have
My
went.
feeling is that the developer really intended to make his money by selling the building after it was completed rather than...
I think that's a real good guess.
And that developer would be Ben Ganther.
Yeah, I am. And what was interesting in those discussions, which I've talked about regularly, when he was asked very specific information, he didn't have it. I mean,
This was in the executive session?
yeah, in the executive
see.
session, we'd say, well, what are your specs? What is this? What is that? What's the building going to look like? What are the materials that are going to be in? I mean, this is a culturally sensitive, both historically and because this has been let to languish for so long. If we're going to do this, we really have to be cognizant of doing it right. We're not going to get another shot at
Absolutely.
this. So we wanted to see what this was going to look like. Give us a visual conceptual idea of what this was going to look like. Well, I don't have that. Okay, Ben, let me just make sure I understand this. You're coming in to give a proposal on a multi-million-dollar project, and you're not ready. Okay, ding, ding, next.
See now in hindsight, and I'm sure you would do this now if you were on the council, right there you should have ended the meeting. You should have said closed session, over.
Yeah.
We're going into open session.
Yeah.
We're clearly not ready for closed session here. If this guy is kind of like making it up as it goes along, it sounds like.
Well, and it wasn't just one meeting. It wasn't just one meeting. And what I found to be incredibly insulting about that is the other developers who had actually put proposals together were ready.
Yeah, see?
You knew what it was going to look like. You knew what the costs were going to be. You knew what the ideas were. I mean, they had dotted all the I's, crossed all the T's. I found that incredibly insulting. And one of the things was, well, you know, Ben's got more experience doing this. Well, then why the hell wasn't he ready? You know?
What was important to the other members of the council was his ability to finance the project.
Yeah.
And the fact is that the project, which he hadn't developed, promised to be grander than the other proposals.
Well, and yeah, and it's all about perception. It wasn't about the reality of what we could actually do and do well. Because see, if you do it too small, then, you know, we didn't give ourselves enough credit.
This is often the way big institutions work. It's not so much the substance of what you do, but it's like Spanbauer's commission on the city. You want to make the gateway to the city look good, so that when you go to the city, you see signage and you see street lights that make it look like a high-quality city.
Even though you got crappy streets while you're traveling,
it doesn't
right?
matter that the
Just
substance.
make sure they think they're going to something.
Yeah. Make them believe that when you get there, you found the yellow brick road, but the road leading
road there,
to it,
you're
you
going
might
to need a
have
new
one.
suspension system by the time you get to the Emerald City.
But we
Speaking
have
of,
just, you know, we do love Oshkosh. I mean, I
course.
really do love Oshkosh. Or we wouldn't be this passionate about things
That's
if
right.
we really didn't care. I mean,
That's
I know
right.
people, you know, Tony, you, Jim, I, Cheryl. I mean, we have developed a reputation by certain media sources and even council members that we're Chicken Little. The sky is falling. Oh,
Right.
they're all negative naysayers. The bottom line is it's real easy to jump on board and be part of something that the media has rolled into a nice
Right.
little packages and is selling for you.
But you know, here's another thing that bothers me. I like the idea of the new urbanism too. Having small shops and having the elderly people, I mean, particularly we're an aging society, so the elderly people move down to an area where they, you know, everything is convenient within walking distance, and you have younger people, older people, and nicer communities rather than the kind of slums that the students live in and so on. All of that is wonderful, except that what we've been doing both here and at the state level is almost ensuring that that won't happen.
Exactly.
Because if you look at what we're overspending on at the state level, and you were involved in this too with the Jackson Street widening, is that we're the DOT has been given above national average funding for promoting highways. Now, what does this mean? What it means is that many people who work in Oshkosh can quickly leave the community to one of the towns or go to Appleton if they want, you know, very conveniently, enjoy whatever they have in the city, assuming they work here, but they're not going to live here. So they're not part of the tax base. And in many cases, the people who are most influential in developments and so on aren't risking anything because they don't live here. The risk of their tax dollars is in the town of Algoma or in Grand Chute or something like that.
You are so right on, Jim. I mean, you really are. I mean, you really are right on with that because we've seen examples of it in our own city, our own chamber.
Well, I was just going to say, our chamber, you know, most of its people, most of its
our
employees.
executive director of the chamber lives in the town of Algoma.
Yeah.
So does the director
Right.
of OCDC lives in the town of Algoma. These are the guys who are watching businesses leave, retail leave, commercial leave, manufacturing leave, and they're all saying, well, I don't know what you're all worried about. Seems to be fine out here, you know.
No, and really, if you look at the city of Oshkosh, and we've been told what a conservative city and how it's so reluctant to make changes, including these kinds of developments. There's a reason for that. Almost any job you look at, the average salary is below what it is in any city of comparable size. I mean, really, Wisconsin itself is below the national median in wages, and this is a northern industrial state. So part of that conservatism has to do with the fact that we really haven't developed in ways that produce the incomes that make it, you know, acceptable for the wherewithal. And then when we encourage people to live outside the community.
What kind of development, Jim, do you think needs to take place in a community like Oshkosh to move us to that next level? I mean, we keep seeing, you know, people talking about retail development. I mean, that does not sustain people. It does not. Manufacturing with NAFTA and GATT has been quickly going south of the border, China, Asia, any place you could think of. Technology.
Mercury Marine.
Mercury Marine.
Going to
We were
China?
just kind of, slow boat
Yep.
to China, all, But do you have some thoughts on, what you see having to take place in order for us to not only survive, because I don't think it's enough to just want to survive. I think we deserve to
flourish.
prosper, to be happy, and stop having that second-class citizen crap thrown on us.
Well, if you had a magic formula, you could command whatever sum you wanted as a consultant. Minneapolis-St. Paul has become a center for high-tech industry and developed. I mean, it's not Silicon Valley to be sure, but Minnesota can afford to spend more on education, on higher education, on almost everything, simply because incomes in that state are substantially higher. And the demographics of Minnesota and Wisconsin are very similar.
So why
Except
do
for the
they
incomes.
why do they command a higher salary ratio than we do? I mean, what has kept us down here versus Minnesota up here? What are the
It's not clear. It seems to me that they made the transition from an industrial base
manufacturing
to
much as we do?
manufacturing to a post-industrial society where we didn't make it. And so when we're looking at balancing our budget, let's say at the state level, the governor looks at Indian gaming. Now, $10 and $15 an hour jobs may sound very good to people living in this city, but they're not.
Right.
And in fact, that's the kind of growth that we've seen. And there's also this notion that somehow you can bring in a big company, Boeing, let's say, or in the case of Oshkosh, a fish fry, and put it on the downtown, and that's going to be a panacea. It's not. First, that industry isn't going to come here. In fact, what you have may leave its headquarters here for a while, but it probably won't stay.
Yeah. The other problem is we give out corporate welfare, things like tax incremental financing districts, without asking the entity that might come in to do anything in return.
Right.
Like create jobs that will be family sustaining. Right?
And make
So-
commitments to
Right.
the community
To stay.
long term.
Right. I mean, Square D was given every possible benefit from the state, and they still ended up leaving the community dry. So there's this. It's a problem at the state level. You have to
I
demand
think-
accountability.
you know,
Right.
I don't know whether, I don't think our city councilmen are being completely disingenuous when they say they can't make those demands when they give what you're calling corporate welfare, the various subsidies, or they put up the districts. I doubt that they would do it even if they had the capacity to do it. But nevertheless, the state has not required that.
Right,
Now,
exactly.
in most European countries, the subsidies for industry are even greater. I mean, look at Boeing's problems in competition with Airbus. I mean, here's a completely subsidized industry. On the other hand, among the things that happen with industry when they get subsidies is they have to guarantee that they're going to stay within the community for a period of time. If they should leave, they have to continue to pay taxes, they have to find jobs, they have to sell the homes of the people who were employed. So there's a disincentive
To leave.
to leave.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, I remember I was living in a small college town in Indiana, and IBM was having problems and was leaving the community. And it was one of those old paternalistic companies, or at least it was at the time. And it paid taxes for 4 years after it had left. It bought the homes of all of its employees and sold them. And it guaranteed everyone who worked a job if they were willing to relocate.
But do you really think that that could happen here? And I hate to be a naysayer about that, but with the level of the mindset of our state legislators right now, where they're like, oh my God, we've lost all these jobs, which, hello, they knew that was coming. And we've got to do this and we've got to do that and we've got to give all these tax breaks. Do you think that they really have the stones to say, you know what, if you come to the Department of Commerce or whatever and you want this money, these are the things that you're going to have to do? They've made themselves look so incredibly desperate because they've frittered away money, like the tobacco money and things like that we could have used in other ways. They've made us look so incredibly desperate that to attract anyone that's worth their salt, do you really want to deal with somebody that looks like they'd hang on by their fingernails for anything?
Well, the legislature gave away more. I mean, the Associated Press reported just this morning, 16 business groups lobbied heavily for this thing called the single sales factor. And Doyle signed it. Both houses of the legislature passed it. We're going to end up losing more jobs. I mean, essentially they're going to start taxing corporations according to one dimension, their sales in the state. And it's going to cost another $45 million out of the Treasury by the year 2006 or something like that. But here's the thing, we're going to end up losing jobs from it because according to federal law, you can only tax a business that has a physical presence in the state. So some of these companies are going to leave the state but end up still selling here.
Sure.
So you end up paying no taxes. And Doyle signs this and apparently didn't even understand what he was signing. Even Tommy Thompson, right, Mr. Pro-Business Republican, would not sign this bill the way it was formulated.
What?
Both houses of the legislature signed it, went off almost unanimously. The governor signed it, and now we're saddled with this.
Unbelievable.
16 big business groups lobbied heavily, thousands
Why
of
would the
dollars.
16 big business groups lobby for something like that? I mean,
Because for many businesses, it's going to cut their taxes
because they
dramatically.
can move? I mean, is that what they're thinking about? Is, okay, we move, we don't pay taxes?
That will be, some of them will move, some of them with the single sales formula will just simply pay less in taxes.
Just by virtue of the
Right,
formula
just
and
by
how it's
virtue,
laid
right,
out?
just by virtue of the formula. And what they're not paying, of course, is going to fall on middle income taxpayers again. I mean, over the last 20 years, the middle income taxpayers have had the brunt of these breaks fall on them. And people don't see this.
Yeah, I mean, you've got 50 states and thousands of cities and counties competing with each other to
Right.
bargain down. Who can provide the larger subsidy? What can you offer the company in order to get them to come? And ultimately, in the case of Boeing, Wisconsin
That
really
was-
decided we could not
That
possibly
was
offer enough.
comical, though, Jim, for
They would
God's
never
sake.
have come here.
I mean, and it was, and it's not like we're just saying, oh, Boeing would never come here because we're Oshkosh, Wisconsin. They laid out all the specs, all of the things that they need.
Exactly.
Wasn't one
And
of them
we-
like a seaport or
And
something
we don't
like that?
have to offer the specs that they
No,
needed
and that,
or
they
wanted.
never were
Well,
going to come
and
anywhere.
they're like,
Of course
oh, we had legislators. Well, we're going to sit down and we're certainly going to talk
That's
about
part of the bargaining, though.
They float this
know,
balloon.
Well,
and
they pit one against the
They
other.
put one, let's say Wisconsin offered something Texas didn't. Boeing goes to Texas and says, well, look,
Yeah.
Wisconsin offered us this as part of the deal. Can you do that?
Well, what I want to know is, has the United States as a whole, not just the state of Wisconsin, but do you think the United States, its people, its business people, the whole environment, do you think it's changed? I mean, do you remember when I was growing up, you always heard about what businesses wanted to do for the community, how they wanted to be participatory. They held picnics for their employees. They if one of their employees was ill, it seemed like people banded together and, if the house needed painting or whatever. I mean, maybe that's just small town America and I was just lucky enough to grow up in Oshkosh. But I just remember hearing about companies seemingly wanting to be more participatory and having a sense of community. Now it's, what do you do for me,
Right.
not what can we do for our community?
You're
You're
right.
remembering a time post World War II through,
I'm
let's
not
say,
that old, Jim, honest to
through
God.
the 70s. No, I mean,
Last
you
of
talk
the
about,
70s.
let's say, between 1947 and 1975.
Yeah, and that
Where good jobs, the mills or factories, the headquarters as well as the production was local. Many of the people who owned the companies actually lived in the communities.
yeah.
It's a very different economy where the headquarters may be in a major city like New York or Chicago or Seattle or San Francisco. Some of the processing may still be done in your community, but the manufacturing, maybe even the sales, maybe the computer work and the sales is being done in India.
So there's no
Perhaps
sense of
the
loyalty.
production is being done in China, or it might be done in South Asia. The people no longer live in the city, they may live in the suburb, or they're probably in the headquarters, in the Gold Coast of Chicago, in the high rise in New York. What sort of commitment will they
Right.
have?
So is this that thing called globalization
Yeah.
that we've heard was going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread for the United States of America? Do you remember when we heard all about that? So globalization has basically turned corporate,
Greed.
yeah, I mean, they've turned the CEOs into like whores.
Yeah.
I mean,
absolutely.
I mean, what else would you
Right.
call people that take money and run and feel no conscience about what they are not doing for a community?
And not only that, but the CEOs are busy reducing workforces left
Right.
and right, and yet they're commanding, and cutting wages, and yet they're commanding these gazillion dollars a year in
Right.
corporate benefits and salaries.
There needs to be an international set of working standards so that it wouldn't pay for anyone to move.
Right.
So that if you go to, wherever the
Bangladesh.
wherever
You're going to have to do the
right,
same
Honduras,
thing. Yeah.
it wouldn't matter because you're not getting a bargain.
Well, did you guys see when the newspaper did this story about how Oshkosh-Local ended up in Glamour magazine? Did you guys see that in the
No.
newspaper?
Uh-uh.
About all the wonderful ways of American life, and Oshkosh-Local overalls was like in the top 5 or 15 or something like that of a way of life in America, and that the people over at Oshkosh-Local were so excited that they would be included in Glamour magazine. I tell you, I had everything I could do not to call up the headquarters and say, "How dare you? You don't even make that here in the United States anymore. How can you be proud of any such thing?" They're called Oshkosh-Local only because you didn't sell the name.
Right.
You hoard everything else, and you're sitting here acting like you have something to be proud of because you made Glamour magazine. Why don't you call them up and tell them the truth? They're now Honduras, by gosh, if you really want to
Yeah.
know.
Why don't you write a letter to the editor of Glamour magazine?
Because, I'll tell you. That's not a bad idea. I thought you were going to say letter to the editor like the Northwestern, and as soon as they see my
Forget
name
that.
come up, it's like, oh, God, here we go.
They don't like you. No, seriously, send something by email or surface mail to Glamour magazine.
Hi, I'm from Honduras, by gosh.
Actually, you could. Why don't you play off with one of their competitors? Because after all, has anyone really looked at what's happening in Honduras and what impact it's had there? I mean,
And-
I don't know if these are sweatshops down there, but surely
Did Glamour
somebody
lose track of reality or
Well,
what?
I'm sure there are other magazines that would love to do an expose on Glamour magazine and look at what's behind the facade with Oshkosh-Local.
You're an
not
evil man. I loved it.
No,
That's
no,
pretty
that's
good.
clever. That's
That's
clever.
really good.
That's not evil. That's just downright clever.
Just the way the brain's clicking away all the
Well,
time.
but really, businesses leaving the community and things like that, it's leaving a lot of holes and pockets and empty buildings all over this community.
Yeah.
And another show that Mel and I had taped, we were talking about OCDC. Oshkosh Commercial Development Corporation. And is Rob the executive director? Is that his title?
That's what
over
they
there,
call
or-
him today. I don't know what they'll call
well,
him tomorrow.
Rob Clayman
Heir
is,
to the throne.
Rob Clayman is the executive director of this thing, and yet we were talking about how there's these buildings all over town that are being abandoned, and businesses leaving left and right. And these business owners who are supposed to be, the whole purpose of OCDC is to not only bring in new business, as you know, but retain what we have. And none of these people who are leaving or even relocating out of the downtown to other parts of the city, like Sherwin-Williams, they've not heard of OCDC or Rob Clayman.
See,
'Cause I've called them and asked.
when Melanie was trying to stop the rezoning of that land for the Walmart superstore because they didn't know what was going to go there.
Oh, well, why should we
See,
care? It's-
your OCDC should be helping with that effort because anybody with their eyes open could see what was going to happen. Someone's going to leave a big box abandoned somewhere. Now we've got 3 big boxes abandoned now,
sure.
right? We've got the Walmart, the Cops, and now the Cub Foods is going to close,
Cub
right?
Foods,
Yep.
And is there any plan? We keep hearing about we should see it as a challenge, isn't that what they say?
Oh, it's going to be a challenge,
Right.
all right. We've got more. What I think is interesting is that you won't hear about those things being discussed because, of course, this will be executive session material
Yeah.
because nobody wants anybody to know what's really going on.
Yeah,
You know,
whoever
do this.
runs for council in April should campaign on ending those closed session meetings.
But it will not.
This has been a problem across the state. There have been a lot of people that have written about this. The closed session statute has been abused
Oh, yeah.
in city after city to end up with these developments that no one wants
Right.
except the developer.
Right.
And I think the only way to end that is to start doing all this in public, a little small d democracy. Goes a long way.
And I think it's going to get real interesting because one of the things that I had suggested long before I left the City Council was to actually bring a House of Economic Development under the responsibility of the city administration.
Right.
Now, maybe I'm all wet on this, but I understand that on the front end of this, it's going to be expensive because you're adding administrative costs
Sure.
for salaries and benefits and whatnot. But what I think that does is it gives more control to the taxpayers. You now have these people working for you. Elected officials who are supposed to be watching what they're doing, reports that will have to come at budget time, explanations that will have to be given at budget time. Right now, we're shelling out money through the Community Development Block Grant Funds to OCDC, which is about $12,500. Not big money, but we absolutely have no control over what's going on. Rob Clayman comes in and says, hey, you know what? We should lessen the prices in the business park. You bet, Rob, anything to make your job easier. We should remove the covenants that say you have to build within 18 months of purchasing the land. You bet, Rob, whatever makes it easier. And there's absolutely not one benefit to either one of those things to the taxpayers. Why would you lower the price of land in a business park that the taxpayers have financed?
And you also pointed out on an earlier show that we taped that not only did they lower those prices and lessen the restrictions under the covenants, but even with that, because Rob Clayman said it would help move those parcels easier.
It's been 4 years since
4
we
years,
sold.
and according to Melanie, not a single parcel has
Hot
sold.
diggity.
I mean, that's the point. I mean, you could find all of this acceptable if it worked.
Right.
Sure.
But holding someone to some sort of performance standard is,
It's unheard of around here.
Well, what do you mean I was supposed to sell property? I mean, I can almost understand if you wanted to, if somebody bought this property in the business park and said, I would like this chunk, and gee whiz, business is going really great, and I'd like to expand, but I don't know that I can get it all, go from finance to finish in 18 months. Certainly at that particular juncture, you could certainly understand where an extension to the 18 months would be granted. But it wouldn't be maybe another 18 months, but rather a 6-month extension. But there has to be a sunset because otherwise we have another G.M. Betty
Exactly.
Right.
V&S variety store. But what I don't understand is, okay, so you lessen the prices, again, no benefit to the taxpayers who have financed it. You remove the covenants that give you a sunset on when the building's actually got to be done. And you can't figure out why nothing's happening. Genius. It's genius. And again, I'm not saying I've got all the answers. I'm just saying if you did this house, and I say House of Economic Development, I don't really care what you call it.
Right.
You have the industrial branch, you have commercial and retail, and then you have a technological branch. And you find people that are experienced in these areas to start really, and I mean pounding the pavement, kicking some tail.
Well, that was a point I was going to make. I heard you or watched you on the city council talking about the wastewater and the.
Are you going to beat me
the
up,
commission,
aren't you? No.
the commission that you.
Stormwater utility?
Yeah, the
That,
professionals.
so that the city would. I can almost imagine that Mayor Hentz would probably appoint, at least initially, someone with a PhD in geology or the kinds of technical professionals who might reflect his good government idea of who should serve on government, commissions like that. But I will bet you within a year or two, all of those people will be replaced by the kinds of people that Bill Castle prefers.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm not sure I understand where we were going with that.
Yeah,
What
well,
does that mean?
Well, it's very much a very difference. Like Steve Hentz has this notion that city managers ought to be trained professionals
Right.
with
PhDs, so to
PhDs
speak, yeah.
with the kinds of training. And Bill Castle's notion is that all
The road to hard knocks is
road
just
to hard knocks. That all you have to have is some experience with business, and not much experience at that, and you're a trained professional.
I often can't figure out with Mayor Hentz whether he really believes a lot of what he's saying. He said that I was backward talking about the stormwater
really?
appeals. But the thing is, he made it sound like this appeals board would be a quasi-judicial body. That's the first smokescreen over here, quasi-judicial. And that they would just be...
nobody knows what the hell that means
Right, they
either.
would have to figure out whether the formula was applied right. And the reality is, when a big business especially appeals, they're trying to say that the city said that we had so many feet of impervious surface, but we only have this much. That's a political issue, right? Or they're going to go in there and appeal and say, this shouldn't be taxed at all.
Yeah.
Right? Now, they'd much rather go in front of a group of unelected people that they can roll than elected officials that have to answer to voters.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you right now, if they would ever end up giving, like, Walmart a refund, who should probably be paying most of the stormwater fees in the city, that is worthy of being recalled, in my opinion. I mean, but elected officials should make that decision. That's political. That's not quasi-judicial.
But if you notice what Steve's been doing, he's been doing a lot of these committees. He wants the South Shore Redevelopment Committee to abrogate his responsibility on having to expend funds.
Right.
Of course, nobody knows where we're going to get the funds to pay for any of this. Paul's the only one who asked.
But then you find it interesting that the chamber kind of backed off on its criticism of the stormwater utility when they saw it was going to go through.
Yep.
Then all of a sudden, literally the second after it was passed, the mayor comes out and says, "Now next meeting, I'm going to call for a stormwater appeals board."
Sure.
Right, which was like a bone to the chamber.
Sure.
All right.
Absolutely.
And I'm sorry, that's got to be an elected official decision.
But Steve is a good government type in the sense that he does tend to appoint people who do legitimately have some expertise. For example, the director of the MPA program is on the zoning appeals board that you were on. He appointed the chairman of public affairs to the police and fire commission. So Steve does do that.
But here's what
most
I
of the councilmen,
But here's what I find interesting.
all they care about is that you've got someone who's friendly to the industry they're supposed to be regulating. And within a year or two, you'll discover that with like any banking commission, it ends up being bankers.
But here's
who would know more about banking than that?
Yeah.
But here's what I don't
How
understand.
about business? Who should get adjustments in their stormwater fees? Well, of course, the industry who.
Right.
The industry that's going to second mortgage
But
that
why
puppy
is it-
with my
Why
bank.
is it every time we try to create a mayor with real executive power, we get told there's no one in this city qualified for that. But now all of a sudden we have brilliant people
Who can serve on boards and commissions.
who can figure out complex formula for stormwater.
Right.
They
They
can't
don't
be
even-
mayor,
Yeah.
but they can figure out the stormwater formula.
Well, that actually kind of leads me into a question that
That is really good. I
that
like
actually
that.
leads me into a question that I had in talking with Councilman Paul Esslinger. He is suggesting, and I don't know that he has, made this formal type suggestion or proposal, but he has talked about it with us, and he's mentioned it on a couple cable access shows that he's been on, that he would like to see a full-time elected mayor working in concert with the council and the city manager. What are your thoughts, both of you, on that?
I mean, I would support that. I mean, my own personal preference is for a full-time mayor with executive powers and an alderman system like they have in Appleton. That is
Or
my
Nina, they've
or
got-
Nina. That would be my preference. That we've seen several times now. That's a tough sell in Oshkosh. You get the people who live out of Oshkosh who put big money into seeing to it that we don't get this. But at the very least, an elected mayor that could be working with the city manager day in and day out. I think that would be at least a partial way.
Well, you know my position all along. I favored an elected mayor with executive powers, but the day-to-day operations of the city ought to be managed by chief administrative officer. On the other hand, it's clear that this person should be a hired hand, and the only way you can ensure that is if the person is appointed by the mayor and at most confirmed by the council. I mean, I'm willing to accept some districts and some at large. I mean, if you feel that you need some people who have a citywide perspective but aren't the majority on the council, that's the kind of system I favor. And in fact, it's become the norm nationwide. Wisconsin is really backward in the sense that we have these extreme forms.
Yeah.
Weak mayors with very few executive powers in cities and large councils, and at the other extreme, city managers who have far more executive authority than city managers do almost anywhere else. Yeah.
Well, for viewers who may be new to the city or who haven't seen either of your views before, what do you feel would be the big advantage to having an aldermanic type form of government with an elected mayor?
It simply provides more representation to the population in the city. I mean, currently it seems to me there are huge segments of the city that don't seem to be getting as good a reputation as others. I mean, you could probably determine that just by the quality of streets, right? The places that have the poorest street quality are probably the places that are not getting the best representation. Now, can that happen in aldermanic systems? Of course. But it's less likely. I just think that there's more accountability. I get frustrated. My view is we always get hit with this idea that, you know, issues are so complex now that you got to have professionals, managers. Do you think this country was ever more complex than in the 1930s when we had, you know, 60% unemployment,
yeah.
fighting fascists in Europe, and yet somehow in the 1930s, average everyday people could run their cities, but now it's too complex. You know, you got to hand it over to the you know, the MPAs and all these people.
One of the things that I'm concerned about, Tony, with aldermanic form of, you know, just strictly your neighborhood representative.
Right.
Number one is we all know that when they've done redistricting, they play with those boundaries
sure.
as though it's somehow their innate right to be able to say, well, I don't want Bob in my district because he could run against me. So the competition thing can be easily taken care of by somebody, you know, playing around, jerry-rigging the boundaries. One of the concerns that I have, though, is the gridlock. That if you have strictly district representation, and Bob over here in this neighborhood is strictly concerned about just his neighborhood issues, and Sue over here in her neighborhood is strictly concerned about hers, what is the impetus for these two to try to come together except to trade votes to make sure you take care of my neighborhood when I need you and you take care of my neighborhood when I need you?
Yeah, I think that's a possibility. The only argument I would make against that is that happens in at-large systems.
Well,
You
yeah,
know, we
that's,
have cases
yeah.
of people that get sidewalks done in their neighborhood. You know?
Or not.
or not.
Or not.
Yeah.
All right. So I mean that's going to happen in any.
And in
any
a large
system.
system, you sometimes, I can recall, I was reading about the 1988 referendum in Oshkosh, where of the 7 councilmen, 5 all lived within a couple blocks of each other. I mean, at large systems tend to, because of the nature of the race, the elections are more expensive. They tend to favor people with more name recognition, which means that businessmen and professionals, people who belong to the Rotary or part of the chamber, people who have or work for large businesses or institutions like a university have a big advantage over any other kind of candidate, unless there's some issue which causes people to become upset.
Do you think people have just kind of become so disenchanted with government as a whole? I mean, look at the recall situation. Look at, you know, I mean, people are so, I'm waiting for somebody to step forward and say, you know what, we're having a tax revolt and we are going to turn this country upside down. I mean, I'm signing on. I'll help. But let's just look at the recall factor. Is this a phenomenon that is just, you know, kind of peaking right now? Is it just starting? And are there certain candidates that are going to find themselves more vulnerable? Or is it really that the average Jane and Joe are up to here with the lies, the manipulation, the don't worry about it, I've got it all under control, and then budget time comes and you find out that you're, you know, $3 billion in debt?
Well, some of the things you're talking about exist nearly everywhere. I mean, Wisconsin has become increasingly dependent upon property taxes. And we're not going to raise taxes, which means we're not going to raise income taxes or corporate taxes, but we're going to raise fees out the wazoo.
Right.
You know,
Right.
you know, we're going to go after lottery money. You know, there are going to be a lot of ways in which we're going to raise things that are not called taxes. They may be revenue enhancements. So that exists everywhere. People are upset. They're also upset because there's been increasing inequality. You talked about those who have benefited from the 9 years when the economy was doing well. I mean, for most Americans, their income hasn't gone up at all. That it hasn't kept up with inflation. So the benefits of a good economy have not been equally divided. But on the other hand, there's a problem. There are only 17 states that allow their statewide officials to be recalled. And
I didn't realize, I really did
there's
not know
17, and 2/3 of the cities allow for recall, but most places make it much more difficult to recall someone. For example, in California, I think it's 12% of the vote, and they give you a long period to collect petitions, and you don't have to be very careful about collecting them. In Wisconsin, it's 15%. There's a much narrower period of time. And we don't have other direct popular initiatives like the initiative where you can actually put propositions on the ballot and they become law no matter whether elected officials want them or not. In some states you can have recall, but you have to have reasons, malfeasance in office, and the courts can say, well, you didn't have good reasons for recalling them, so we don't care about your petitions, we're going to throw them out. And there's another point too. That is that those who hold elective office and those who support them don't just walk away. They always claim there are legal problems with a petition. I've never seen a referendum or an initiative in which the powers that be didn't come up with legal arguments and insist upon going to court against any kind of citizens group to try to cut you off at the pass by making it much too expensive or by
The city of Oshkosh did it, didn't they?
Sure. Well, it's common in referendum
Yeah.
campaigns. And so if a referendum or a recall is going to work, it's only going to be if it's supported by big money. I mean, if this Congressman Isa hadn't been willing to put up $1 million plus in order to support the recall, all of that discontent in California would have gone nowhere because there would not have been enough money to have a statewide recall. You couldn't have done it.
Well, speaking of that, now we only have just a couple of minutes left here, but what do you both think is going to happen out in California, and what are Schwarzenegger's chances here?
The
Or
governor.
Gary Coleman's, for that matter.
The governor.
Why don't we talk about Wisconsin? I mean, you know, the group that recalled the county executive over the pension scandal in Milwaukee
Oh, yeah.
and successfully recalled several of the county board members is now claiming that if they can't get the governor to freeze taxes, that they may attempt a recall effort here. Now, it would be much harder here, and I'm not sure they can translate their success from, you know, Milwaukee County statewide. And I'm not sure there's anyone who would fund that kind of campaign as there was in California. But Wisconsin is one of those states which has most of the other characteristics you talked about that could make, but we don't have an Arnold Schwarzenegger. Who would we have? The guy that plays Monk?
Yeah, he is from Wisconsin.
Is he really?
Yeah, he really is.
Well, he's funny too.
Who would we have?
Well, he's
former
compulsive.
quarterback for the Packers. What do you get? I mean,
Exactly.
Well,
We're going to have these guys back because
Oh,
there's
absolutely.
just so much stuff to talk about,
Yeah.
and I would really, I hope that you guys would, humor us and come back.
I think Ray Davis is out in California, to answer your question.
Yeah, I do too.
And I think that's okay because he's one of those corporate toady Democrats that I think should be out of there.
polls are showing Bustamante, the lieutenant governor.
With the Hispanics and such, isn't it?
Well,
I mean, isn't that what they said? Is like Hispanics were like the big. He was the big push.
Arnold's an
Schwarzenegger's
immigrant,
got
but
a
he
chance?
took the wrong
Oh
position.
yeah,
Proposition
Arnold's got a great
137.
chance. People say he hasn't taken stands yet because they're writing his scripts. The guy's an actor. Once the scripts are written, he's going to do great.
Well, what position did he take on 136? Oh, we only have 30
He's
seconds.
anti-immigrant.
Yeah, but now he's the immigrant.
He's
right?
Austrian.
But
Well, that's
it
it,
was
guys.
Hispanics that
We're out of time, but thanks very much for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Eye on Oshkosh. Take care. We'll see you next time. You keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.
We'll be back.
Oh, I think he's got a great chance to win.
Well, bottom line, I mean, he's got board money and money and exposure.